Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide, which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Tamsa Ngajo, and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Juliana Olayinka, journalist and broadcaster. Priscilla Mwipo, public affairs analyst. And Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business. Now, this has been a very tough week in Africa because we have had Ebola coming back again, but this time in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Juliana, I will come to you first. Seeing what is actually going on now, what would be the fears in terms of the spread and what is going on? Because I know you followed the story quite a lot.
Well, I have followed the story. I wouldn't say invasively, but of course it's worrying. Ebola, we know, doesn't have any known cure. There are vaccines. And I think the biggest concern is the populated location of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It isn't in the capital, Kinshasa, yet. I think the reason why people have been talking about it, because of course a few years ago when we had the awful outbreak in West Africa, which killed thousands and thousands of individuals who knew they got it wrong. Communication wasn't as rapid as it could be. So I believe there have been under 20 deaths, but it is still worrying. And I think who are doing the right thing, and they're letting people know, and they're telling people that they are afraid that, it could come out of the region.
Yeah, Priscilla, when we look at lessons learned, we always talk about that. The WHO and other agencies, MSF included, they rushed in very, very quickly. Would we say that has made a difference on the ground, or there will still be a need to upscale the response?
I think there's a huge need, and there's a bigger concern in that who is now telling us that the vaccine that they want to give to the DRC is only experimental. They're telling us that they've not verified whether or not this vaccine actually works or whether or not it's going to deal with the issue. So my concern here is that, when we first had the outbreak, we saw it go right across West Africa. Who had told us further on that there was now a vaccine? Then we were being told that the vaccine hadn't been tested, and so they weren't able to use it. And then we go further, and then they say, yes, the vaccine is ready. And here we are, another outbreak. And then you tell us we're still experimenting. So my concern now is, lessons should have been learned. Why is WHO telling us today that the vaccine that they're using in this particular situation is still experimental? The contradictions are too many. But I am glad to see countries like Nigeria are beginning, to take care of this situation, because obviously they dealt with it very well previously. And they've just gone back on that immediately. And I hope that we can prevent it from spreading, and that a lot is being done within the DRC to prevent, for those who are coming in and out of the country, to pick it up. Yeah, a lot of countries around that area. You've got Congo, Brazzaville, nearby along the river. And also, I think the WHO are saying that the vaccine has not yet been approved. So it is still experimental. But let me bring in Lanre here, because I have seen you campaign for probably more attention to be given to other health areas in a holistic and proactive way. So when we talk about Ebola, is that taking away the attention that should be given to all these other health problems like TB, probably HIV and AIDS and others?
I wouldn't say I'm a campaigner for more focus on things that are not Ebola, but yes, of course, Ebola is an emergency. It's something that captures international headlines, but we all know that Africa has very, and no pun intended, very chronic health issues. Health systems across the continent are not able to meet even basic needs as far as healthcare is concerned. Things like maternal mortality are still exceptionally high across Africa, in Nigeria in particular. So yes, hopefully this can be a bit of a catalyst for some discussion around, well, how do we make sure that the underlying factors are addressed? That was also a problem in 2014 in West Africa during the Ebola outbreak. In many ways, the catastrophe that followed was a symptom of the decrepit nature of health systems. So if you really want a long-term response to Ebola, you need to invest in healthcare. It's pretty simple and pretty obvious.
Yeah, Juliana, a lot of people have been talking, especially when you look at Southern African region, where I come from. People are saying that given the statistics that Lesotho had, Swaziland had the highest in the world in terms of how
HIV?
they compare. Yes, Botswana and then South Africa. Probably in numbers you talk about South Africa, but the work that the governments have done and the money that is actually going in, would we say that's a model to copy?
No,
or
no.
people
I wouldn't
just
say it's a
have
model to copy. Sorry to cut you, but you know, just agreeing with what Lamre said, I think, you know, there are chronic illnesses across Africa which the governments are not taking responsibility for. I think if looking at Nigeria in an isolated case, I think only 4% of the budget is for public health, and that's an issue. It's no secret that pharmaceutical companies, especially in Africa, are monetizing the middle classes. You know, I have friends who live in, you know, wealthy suburbs in Nigeria, and if you follow them to a clinic or a hospital, you would think it's better than going to the NHS or the best healthcare in America. They're seen very quickly, and that's where a lot of the money is going. So if you're from a certain class or stance, you would think that healthcare in Africa is great, and you know, they're dealing with diabetes, with heart conditions, but the actual issues that are plaguing very poor people are not being dealt with. I wouldn't use South Africa as a model, no. I think the continent as a whole needs to improve, and the government needs to be putting the money in.
Yeah. Right, taking from Juliana's point, Priscilla, the government can only put in money where the statistics speak the story. So if, as we are hearing in Nigeria, that when you talk about TB, as an example, the numbers that are actually being given officially are very low compared to what the reality is on the ground. So should we be looking at that and say the government is just delivering on what it believes the problem to be?
I found that report so very contradicting yet again, in the sense that the report told us that the Minister of the Minister of Health for State gave 2010 figures as opposed to more up-to-date figures. However, that was a mistake on his part. But having said that, we also have a situation where reporting tuberculosis has gone down, so the report says. But back in 2010, we had less than 100 centers where people could go to report it or to be treated. But that has subsequently increased to something like over 300. So I think that if we're now having more provision to take care of the issue, then it's likely that numbers are going to drop. But having said that, Nigeria is not doing very well in terms of data. Recently, there was a burn down, wasn't there, of the center for where they collated the data for TB. I think they need to do more. I also think that when we speak of HIV, for instance, it's not just a problem of government. It's a problem of government and the people. Because I think we've all been familiar with HIV for such a long time that we should not be careless at any given time. And it's disappointing to find that young African men and women, no matter how educated they are still very, very careless in their sexual conduct. And that is a problem that I think individuals need to take up. As much as governments, yes, they have their issues, but we also have responsibilities ourselves.
I like when you say careless, but let me go to Landry and find out whether that applies to certain cases where political leaders will deny the existence of AIDS, for instance, or as would have happened in the DRC in the last few days, where the religious leaders were telling people not to go for medical attention because they said you will be healed in church. So 2 or 3 lives were lost. How would you address those attitudes?
I'd actually like to get back to the numbers. You said the numbers tell the story. Here are some numbers. Africa carries 24% of the global disease burden, a quarter, but it has only 3% of the global health workforce. So that right there tells you something. It tells you the continent is not investing in healthcare. 90% of malaria deaths are in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. 70% of HIV infections are in sub-Saharan Africa. 26% of tuberculosis infections are in sub-Saharan Africa. By 2020, the continent is, the forecast is that 3.9 million people are going to die of non-communicable diseases in Africa. The World Bank president has just said that Africa needs to invest a hell of a lot more into healthcare. There is no alternative. And blaming cultural factors, blaming contextual factors, that to me, it's dishonest, it's insincere, and it is, I mean, never mind the real world impact of that. You know, people are dying daily from completely preventable diseases. We need more investment. We need serious government strategies, not lip service to healthcare.
Okay.
We also need education, because
Priscilla.
I think that if people understood...
Okay, Priscilla, Juliana, no, I want to talk about what this does, especially to tourism. But I want to take a break. Let's have a cup of tea, bring you some coffee. Well, we'll take a quick break now. We have plenty more to discuss. So please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Tamsan Ngajo and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Juliana Olainka, Priscilla Mwipo, and Lanre Akinola. Now, we were talking about Ebola and whether, the narrative that is actually being given, and especially someone thinking that the map of Africa is just the size of Europe, not realizing that where there is a problem, it might not affect the other areas. But Juliana, let me start with you. Does that narrative then push away people who might want to visit Africa, who might want to go and enjoy and be, the tourists that we all want to see coming to the continent?
In an answer, yes, I think it does. I think there have always been wealthy Westerners who have travelled all over and are interested in visiting Africa, and we've seen successes of that in the southern regions. I think there was a time where north of Africa, lots of people were visiting there, but then of course we've seen the rise of terror groups. And if you go to most government websites, we're in Britain, I know the British government advised their tourists not to travel to several parts of Africa, including Nigeria. Even Abuja, which is the capital, they say don't go there unless you have a reason to go, and this does put tourists off. I think the African tourist hubs need to start getting in with the big players so we can have discounted travel holidays, so you can pay in installments. Things like that get people from the rest of the world to come to your country. Yeah,
one of the reasons, you say the southern region have been doing very well, and one argument was maybe they are, rhinos and they've got bigger horns when they are in the south. But Priscilla, the Chinese have been talking about that, coming to, look after all these things that you guys have in Africa. So how can we look at why most Chinese people tend to be the ones going to Africa? Well, especially the safari.
I think the Chinese are prepared and ready to explore. Just as they are with business, they're also ready to explore with tourism. It's perhaps for them, it's a means to inquire as to what is available and what they can invest in. But I certainly welcome them to come in. They are, looking at the cultural aspect and what Africa has. As Juliana says, Africa has been served a disservice. When it comes to the narrative, it's going to take us a while to change that. And I think Africa also owes herself the duty to sell herself appropriately, because there is no country in the world that's not experiencing, come on, the terrorist activities we see here in Europe, it's quite worrying, it's quite frightening. And there's no country in the world that doesn't experience criminal activities in neighborhoods and things like that. You can get shot on the street of New York just for walking in the wrong place. But, we don't sell the other aspect of Africa, all our natural reserves, all our, very, very interesting nature, places that we have. We don't sell that. And Africa needs to start selling that. Africa also needs to begin to work on tourism, the economy of tourism, rather than sort of just looking at it. Because countries like Kenya, Tunisia is in Africa, but they survive on what? Tourism. We see that a great deal in the northern part of Africa. So I think the rest of Africa needs to learn a lesson from that and take it on board. Gambia in the West is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I like the economy aspect, and let me come to our numbers, man, Landry, because this
I've got numbers.
Africa, well, about 10%. Tourism, you talk about 10%. When you look at the West, you know, the receipts from tourism, massive. In Africa, you have that challenge, of course. Every country is different. In Nigeria, I talk about religious tourism, where a lot of people go to these Pentecostal churches, TB Joshua and others. So different opportunities for different countries in Africa.
Okay, I'll have to do this quickly because there's a lot of numbers. First, Africa does quite well on high-end tourism. Botswana, Namibia, Zanzibar,
Tanzania.
South Africa, Tanzania, Southern Africa. You get a lot of high-value tourism. The gap is in that mass market. North Africa dominates that and actually has had the best quarter for, I think, most of the last decade. Egypt's revenues for Q1 2018 are up 83%. They're now back to pre-Arab Spring levels. So it is bouncing back. In terms of Chinese tourism, globally, Chinese tourists spent $258 billion last year. That's almost twice as much as the US, and it's 70 billion more than the UK, France, and Germany combined. It's a huge opportunity for Africa if they can leverage it. What they need to do is just make it easier for Chinese tourists to travel to the continent. And yes, I mean, if you have a concrete focus strategy, there's no reason why Africa can't become a huge destination for tourists globally, but that's not going to happen automatically. That's why some countries are doing well and others are not, because some countries are passing the right laws, the right regulation, and others are just sitting on the potential and doing nothing with it.
Juliana, there's something that I wanted to come to you about, and probably that comes to the royal wedding as well. Most people saying, oh, Prince Harry and Meghan should go there, and a lot of people saying they should go to the...
They had their first date in Africa.
They were in Botswana, yes, but some people were saying that they should go to Zimbabwe, because if you want to see Victoria Falls from the front, you go to Zimbabwe. If you want to see Victoria Falls from the back, historically, then you go to Zambia. Right. But when you combine all these issues, that they have high value tourists and the low end where people come, they get drunk, they have fun, which should Africa really target?
I don't know, sorry, but I'm thinking about
somebody who just
not Prince Harry or Meghan Markle, but I'm thinking about Nigeria and the West Africa. I think Ghana's improving. But you know, to touch on what Lamre was saying, I do think, you know, the ministry, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Ministry of Culture, they need to do more. I'm sick of hearing about the potential. Let's do something with the potential. I think visas need to be easier. There's too much restriction. You know, I've had so many English people calling me, do you know somebody in the embassy? I'm trying to get to Nigeria. They've asked for this, they've asked for that. That needs to be easier. It should be, you know, something that you should be able to do easily. And of course, as well, the problem that we have in some parts of West Africa, which you don't have in the south and in some parts of the east, is the fact that, you know, if you want to go off the beaten track, it's just too dangerous. Priscilla did mention that, yes, New York is dangerous. Of course, parts of the Caribbean are dangerous. And we know, of course, South Africa is very dangerous. But there are some parts in West Africa that are just no-go zones. And if you want these tourists that are going to spend the big bucks, they have to be able to access them.
Yeah, I think the visas in the north were relaxed, and we saw an influx.
Very quickly, a point before you go to Priscilla, very quickly, this is a really important point we haven't covered at all. That is intra-African tourism. According to the figures, 40% of tourist visits to Africa are now from within the continent. And in sub-Saharan Africa, it's 2 out of 3. That's 66% of all tourists in sub-Saharan Africa come from other African countries. So let's not worry just about international. Let's also worry about other Africans.
Yeah, Priscilla, let me come to you on 2 points. One, you know, the very people that Landry is talking about, but also the development that Juliana is talking about, that we need to do something. And there was this suggestion in Nigeria that the Sambisa forest should be converted into an area that could be safe for tourists and add value to the tourism industry in Nigeria. So there are those 2 areas, the people that we're targeting, and so whether we can convert all these areas to be safe destinations.
Let's leave Sambisa Forest to the army and for them to deal with the issues in Sambisa Forest. Because Nigeria is a huge country, and we're talking from north to south, east to west. There are so many places that you can go to, and that we don't need to get to Sambisa Forest. Now, regarding intra-Africa trading and tourism, we just need the infrastructure. Because of the lack of infrastructure, being able to take a flight from one part of Africa to the other, for some countries, they come into Europe and then come back into Africa to go to other parts. Those are the issues that we need to look at. We need to look at linking our roads. Something that's happening very, very well in the East at the moment. Yeah. We see the road link from Kenya, Tanzania, and to Rwanda. Now that can only enhance tourism, business, and their economy. Something like that needs to happen. We need to have intentional dedication to creating these things on the African continent. It's not just going to happen. We've lost out so much so, not just on our human capital, but also on the opportunities that avail us. In Nigeria, if you go to Akwa Ibom, I mean, I was shocked. I remember staying in the Le Méridien Hotel, 2013, I think it was. And the only people that came out of that hotel were white men, whether they were from Europe or from the US.
I want very quick.
That's not a surprise.
And it was the golf course that was there that they were attracted to.
But I want very, very quick comments from the two of you. You were talking about the branding, what the ministries should do. What should they do now to get
well, it's not just saying Nigeria and Africa are open for business. We're open for travel. We're open for tourism. Come and visit.
Okay, Landre, just
stop talking about potential. Start realizing it. Simple.
Yeah, they should learn to sell packages, for crying out loud. If they could sell package holidays, it would help. This is about what we are having. I know the discussion will continue, but don't forget to follow us on Real JH UK on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Tamsan Ngajo, and from the entire team here in London, goodbye, and thank you for watching JH UK.